imagine that you're pooping and like when you poop, there are instances in which you should be pushing more or you shouldn't be pushing. Now imagine there's a person literally looking at you, and just on their time, whenever they decide, they're yelling at you, push, push now, push, push. And ciao visiem. So in the previous video, which I'm going to put somewhere right here, I talked about the difference between doctors and midwives and why and all the evidence essentially that shows that midwife attended birth is so much safer and has better outcomes than a doctor attended birth, and why we sort of moved to the doctor hospital model, what explains that, and so on. So in this video I want to focus more on talking about the hospital setting, and there is so much to talk about and so much information I want to share. In order to keep it short, I've separated into specific points, which essentially these points were really important to me as to why I did not want to have a hospital birth. And why I did not consider hospital birth. Now, just to quickly mention, I really hope you watched the previous video because I gave some very important disclaimers, as I understand that this is a very sensitive subject, and I just want people to be clear on the fact that my choice is not better than anyone else's choice, that all birth is sacred, and so much other information that I gave there in that video. So I really hope that you saw that and keep that in mind as we move forward. So number one reason for me as to why I did not want to deliver with a doctor in a hospital is that doctors rush birth. Doctors are in general not used to waiting for procedures to happen at our time. It has to happen at their time, and because of the entire setting of a hospital, it cannot facilitate that, and so doctors rush birth all the time. I read in one of the books that instead of diagnosing so many women with failure to progress, which really means that your cervix is not dilating at some completely arbitrary made-up pattern that it should be dilating in. What we really should be doing is diagnosing doctors with failure to wait, because that's truly what's happening. And this rushing is the primary reason why we have so much, epidurals and drugs and C-sections and unnecessary procedures, because doctors just don't want to wait. Doctors' shifts are over, doctors want to get home, hospitals have a general, like within 12 hours, in and out, and so on. So birth is rushed, and birth is something that cannot be rushed. It should not be rushed. It is absolutely wrong to rush it. Birth is extremely unique. Labor can take anywhere from like an hour to 70 hours to more, okay? It's completely unique and different from one person to another. There is no one-size-fits-all model, and a one-size-fits-all model is precisely what's used in hospitals. That's the metrics that they use. So let's say in a hospital, let's say it took you 8 hours to go from 3 centimeters dilated to 5 centimeters dilated. So that means that it's going to take you another 20 hours to get to 10 centimeters dilated, just by doing the math. That is not how that works. That is not how our bodies work. We can literally go to 10 centimeters dilated within an hour and a half, There's no telling. Past progress says nothing about future progress, but all of these really, it's such a larger issue with like science and technology in general, just being very masculine, being very against nature. I should just implant here for everybody to read Vandana Shiva on ecofeminism, and these are very, very deep-rooted issues. Metrics they use are illogical, and it's quite honestly really horrifying and at the same time hilarious at just what is going on and what is accepted as normal birthing procedures in 2021. As I mentioned before, the desire to rush birth is the primary reason why so much epidural, Pitocin, and other drugs is used in hospitals. Statistics literally show that during holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, the use of these drugs like triples. It's sky high because doctors want to rush home to turkey time, to dinner, just that's it, get it over with. Just knowing a statistic like that, for me, is enough to never, ever, ever want to trust this sacred process to any doctor in any hospital ever. So number 2 is a point that I obviously can't speak to, but this is something that so many women have described as being their experience in a hospital, that it became really, really important to me as well. So basically, in a hospital, you are pressured to make choices, or you're not even asked. Choices are made for you. And so you cease to be an active agent in your own birth. Not your own birth, in your birthing process. It's extremely disempowering, and it just has awful, awful outcomes, and issues come up with so much, like depression and postpartum depression and just trauma. So many women describe their experience as simply laying there, but not feeling like they are there. Like all the doctors and nurses are talking over them, making decisions for them, like they're sort of this machine laying there who doesn't matter, whose opinion doesn't matter, whose feelings doesn't matter, whose body doesn't matter. As I said, this leads to so much trauma and depression post-birth, when you have felt like you were essentially violated and disrespected in this process. Birth is a process where the rest of the world should be listening to you and following your cues and following your body, which is what happens at a home birth. But in a hospital, that's not the case. You are following, even with the fact that, yelling at you to push, which is something I'm going to go into a little bit later. But yeah, so a lot of women describe that one of the reasons they wanted to have a home birth was empowerment, ability to own your own experience. In a hospital, we need someone's permission to wake up our child, to go touch them, pick them up, and that has massive psychological impact on how we think we can parent and whether we believe in our own authority. So yeah, these issues of empowerment, lack of agency, and just not feeling like you have any authority or agency in this process. So the next point of why I did not consider hospital at all is hospital policy. So there are certainly things you can do to make a hospital birth better, to ameliorate it, to sort of cater it for you. You can hire a doula and design a birth plan and have her advocate for you aggressively. You can, do some things. I guess you can try to research and find a hospital and a doctor that is a little bit more progressive and better, although you don't actually know who's going to be present during your birth in a hospital, so that doesn't really work. But there are things you cannot change because of hospital policy. For example, in a hospital, you cannot eat or drink or move around. Like, you're denied those things, and those things are so important. Labor, as I said, can literally take 2-3 days, and it's exhausting. Like, you need to actually be eating and you need to be moving around. Like, those things are crucial. For me, that alone is, I need that freedom. I need those things, absolutely. Or the birthing position, laying down. I'm sure by this point we all know that is the absolute incorrect birthing position. We're working against gravity and against the positioning of our pelvis, and because of that French king, whoever had a fetish, that's why we all stuck with this position, and also so that doctors would have an easier time to get up in there. I want to have options. I want to be able to squat, to be on my hands and knees, to do a birthing position that works for me. Hospitals also have arbitrary timing rules, as I mentioned before, where, if you haven't progressed past this point at, whatever time, X time, then you must get Pitocin or epidural or whatever. Or if you haven't progressed past this point, you must get a C-section. And those are things that you cannot argue. It's just hospital policy, and once you pass that benchmark or whatever, that's simply what's going to happen. No one cares how you feel about it. And you're also hooked to like at least 2 different wires the entire time. You have the IVs flowing in because of the no food and drink policy. You have the constant electronic fetal monitoring, which is completely unnecessary. So you're just so restricted. And of course, as hospital policy, you're wearing the hospital gown. You have constant or frequent vaginal checks, which are also unnecessary for the most part. Again, you can't argue with it. Hospital policy. Now, the next point is the hospital environment. For me personally, and for a lot of people, hospitals are not really the environment that puts us at ease. For me, hospitals make me feel the opposite of relaxed, that the environment fosters fear. It's one in which I feel that an emergency is happening. You go to a hospital when you're sick, when something really unnatural has happened to you. This is why there's actually a higher chance of infection during birth while at a hospital, because it's an environment for sick people. And there's also a need to think about symbols, which is something that they talk about in the Birthing from Within book. So hospitals are filled with symbols, doctors in the lab, in the white lab coat, the different electronic monitors on each side, the beeping and the noises and the, you know, the stuff that's going, the talking that happens in the hospital, the different nurses that come in and doctors that come out, the equipment, the instruments, the setting itself, even the colors, like all of that stuff, those are all symbols that have meaning. And so even if your initial reaction is like, no, I actually feel safe in a hospital, I've always felt safe in a hospital, you have to remember that a lot of those things are subconscious. You don't really think about the fact that, you know, like some of these things actually signal danger to you or signal unsafety. And also you have to remember that I may have always felt safe in a hospital, but during birth and labor, you are at your most vulnerable. You've never been this vulnerable in your life. So it's an additional thing to think about. So the next point is that, as I mentioned before, you don't actually always know who's going to be there with you during birth. So you might have been told that it's going to be this doctor, but that could literally change. And also your doctor literally comes in like comes in, comes out, a minute here, a minute there, or maybe they just come in for the last 15 to 20 minutes when you're actually giving birth. Your doctor does not labor with you. This is an extremely important point. So who you're actually laboring with are the nurses that you, once again, didn't choose. You don't even know them. So for me, that alone is just absolutely wild. I mean, I took such a long time to choose my midwife, to know that I need to have a connection with this person. I need to trust this person. I need to feel safe in her presence. And in the hospital, it's the exact opposite. And that's because doctors are oftentimes delivering 5-6 babies at a time, or they have other procedures going on. So they're just running in and out and, you know, like trying to get these things done. They're working on their schedule. You know, if this birth is almost done in room 3 and you're still lagging behind, they might recommend push for you to, you know, take some drugs or move this process forward and so on. It's literally just the design of the hospital. So I don't want it to come off as just like simply villainizing doctors or hospitals. It's literally the design of it. Like, that is just how it is. It does not facilitate a natural childbirth. So now, and this is the most important point, I think, is the point of fear. And this fear stems from the environment, the tech, the unnecessary procedures, the doctors, the nurses, the whole thing. It's an environment which essentially fosters fear. But in order for us to understand this point better, we need to understand what role fear plays in labor and in birth in general. So essentially, the way that we are physically and psychologically wired, since, you know, mind and body are connected, even if Western medicine and, you know, doctors don't want to acknowledge that that is the case. The way we are wired is that fear absolutely stalls or stops our labor from progressing. We just can't progress when we're in fear, which explains so much of what's happening in hospitals and why it's happening, you know, why all these failures to progress, and why there's this oftentimes need for all of these procedures and medications and so on. So much of that comes down to literally fear. And this is true if you look at animals, like if you look at nature. If an animal is in the middle of giving birth, like maybe already birthed one of her, you know, babies, or is in the middle of it, and then a predator appears, instantly suck it all in, stop labor, and, you know, however long it takes, whether it's a couple of hours or a whole day or whatever, they will only continue when the predator or fear or whatever is gone. And we work the same way, and so much of the environment and everything is really just fostering fear in us, and we don't feel relaxed. And, you know, like even thinking about it, you know, laying there completely exposed, that you're most vulnerable, and it's hard to feel relaxed and safe already just because of the nature of giving birth. Now add in everything else that, you know, hospital has to offer and all of that stuff, it's so much harder. In order to progress, we need to feel calm, we need to be in a calm and quiet environment, we need to feel empowered and supported and cared and loved. This is really the opposite of what I've described thus far. And the other thing is to do with pain. So as we know, labor and birth can be very, very painful. And the thing with fear, once again, how we're wired, is that fear produces pain, and it makes pain worse. Pain management is a whole other thing that I could do another video on, because there's so much going into with all the hormones that are released and all of the procedures and things that are happening in our body, and a lot of other pain management techniques that we can easily use and should be using. But all of them essentially hinge on you feeling very relaxed, feeling loved, and feeling joy, even laughter, and it just typically does not happen in a hospital environment. Lastly, I mean, there's a million other like miscellaneous little things, as I mentioned already, the birthing position, and then there is this whole thing of yelling at you to push, push, push. Like any birth I've ever seen on TV has that scene. It has that scene, you know, from Jane the Virgin to whatever. Like every single thing, they always have that scene where, you know, you're there, you're almost there, and then the doctors or your birth partner or your whoever is yelling at you and saying push, push, and then you're screaming and your face is all red and you go ah, and then that's what happens. That is the completely wrong approach, like completely wrong approach. So first of all, nobody should be ordering around the woman who's giving birth, because only, or the person with the uterus, because only they really know what their body is asking of them to do at that given moment. So that's just like a no. Don't yell at the woman, don't tell her what to do, what not to do, and so on. The other thing is that actually, like, pushing, we contract more, which actually makes it harder to release. And the last thing, most importantly, is that when you're having rushes or contractions, and when that, you know, happens, the moment happens that you should be pushing, the urge to push or to breathe down is so strong that your body is already naturally going to be doing that. Like, you can't not be doing that. That is literally what all women describe after giving birth, that is how it goes. Any person on the outside does not know when that exact moment is and when it isn't. And in one of the books that I was reading, a good example, I mean, there's nothing you can compare giving birth to, but what they talked about was, imagine that you're pooping and, you know, like, when you poop, there are instances in which you should be pushing more or you shouldn't be pushing. Now imagine there's a person literally looking at you, and just on their time, whenever they decide, they're yelling at you, push, push now, push, push. I mean, like, no, absolutely not. Okay, so these were the reasons I personally never really entertained a hospital birth. These are some of the statistics and evidence and, you know, knowledge of why hospital birth often fails and often is not the safest option, which is already what I discussed in the previous video. Now in the next video, which I'm about to film and, you know, will drop as soon as I edit this one, is how home birth and or birthing center birth differs from what I just explained, and, you know, all of these things. I listed what the difference is, how it looks like there, and why that was definitely a better choice for me, and why maybe more people should consider it. So thank you for watching, and make sure to watch the previous video and the next video, and comment and ask any questions below. As I said before, I have so much more information that I could be sharing, but I have to cut because of the time limit. So do feel free to comment and question. I'll always respond, and, you know, like and subscribe if you want to see more of this content. I love you.